So both players have not been fully accurate, but this is going to be our final game before the bullet. There are less than 3 minutes remaining in the 3+1. So Benjamin, I think for Jan Nepomniachtchi, he needs to find a win here.
Exactly. We've seen English opening, Magnus playing the system with knight f6 and pawn to h6, b4. I think Jan is following the game between Prag and Magnus in the World Cup in the finals, knight d4, a4 here by Jan. But yeah, Jan needs at least a win here to close down the gap a little bit. With 3 points, I still think that Magnus is a heavy favorite, but at least there would be some chances.
He needs to get a victory to cut this to 3. He'll just feel better about himself if he's able to be in that kind of striking distance. But Magnus, he plays a6. He develops his rook in the starting square. He wants to open the a file. And I feel like this position, it's not one of those tactical melees. It's a situation where both sides are playing small, waiting moves, hoping to improve their position.
Exactly. Rook e8, a crafty little move by Magnus. He's waiting for Jan to take us now. This will open up the e-file for his rook. He might also consider the move b4 here. I think that is the only reason why he's paused to think. Because otherwise you just take the knight.
Yeah, so what is going on right now? We see that Magnus is choosing between the two, but he plays b4, so he takes the road less traveled by, and Jan was surprised.
Yeah, exactly. b4. I'm sure that Jan had anticipated this move, pawn takes d4. Maybe, okay, so bishop f8, the bishop drops back. I think black should be doing quite fine here. White is a little bit more active, but this pawn on a5 is isolated, so Magnus can try to target it later. Jan is preparing to meet c6 with knight a3 to c4, which looks pretty reasonable. You put some pressure on d5, and you further defend the pawn on a5.
Oh, look at this move. Bishop takes f6, queen takes f6, bishop takes e4. Is this a pawn sacrifice, or what exactly does black have in store?
Well, the pawn on a5 is hanging at the end, so we see Jan taking on e4, but I think here if you take on d1 and take on e4, black should be doing pretty fine. Maybe Jan can consider the take and go rook d8 to freeze black, but is there a way for black to crawl out?
That looks scary. There may be a rook a4 move to counterpin some of the pieces, and perhaps there are not enough pieces remaining for white to really have the upper hand, but it does look a little annoying.
Yeah, so I think that is why Magnus has paused the thing. It looks quite scary. Okay, he does take on e4. Let's see if Jan is going to go for it, take on e4 and take on d8. That being said, there's no immediate threat as bishop e4 is not available, and maybe black just has the time to go, let's say f6, king f7, followed by rook e8, and then black's doing very well strategically with the bishop pair.
Exactly what Magnus goes for. So you spotted it, he did as well, and now, as you said, the king gets out with to f7, the a5 pawn is the target, black has the bishop pair, and after king f7, the next move can be rook to e8, just to trade off those rooks.
And f3 by Jan, trying to kick the rook away from the fourth rank, so there's bishop b4, but Magnus does not fall for it. He goes rook to a4, stopping the bishop from coming here, and I think he's doing quite well here. Knight c2, you can trade here, and then play king f7 afterwards. That being said, how do you unpin yourself here on the back rank?
You're going to play bishop e7, and when the rook goes to h8, you're going to go bishop back to f8, and then shut the door on the rook in the corner. So it's actually quite straightforward. Very nicely done by Magnus. King f7, bishop e7, and the rook is flushed out of there.
Yeah, I love that idea, Robert. I don't see what Jan should do in the meantime. Right now, he has to recapture with one of his pieces. I suppose with the knight, king f7 is going to come, maybe like knight b3, but then bishop e7, the rook has to move, and bishop f8. And it looks like Magnus has a very comfortable advantage. He's got the bishop pair, pawn on a5 is a little bit weak, so it's looking tough for Jan here.
Knight takes a1 to b3. I like that the best, but I don't think it's that good of a position. The bishop pair is just strong, and once that second bishop enters, the light square bishop, I feel like white is going to be on the defensive, and Jan doesn't look very happy.
No, bishop b7, great find here by Magnus. The rook has to move. I guess maybe you have to move it all the way back, but then after bishop b6, black is in full control. Like you said, in case of rook h8, you go bishop f8, shut the rook out, the bishop is going to join the action, and black is comfortably better.
And then the question goes to how did, he allowed his rook to be shut off back there. That's surprising to me.
Okay.
And Benjamin, this looks bad for white. Like, can't black just play c5 here and start pushing those pawns?
c5 is a nice move. I think what Jan is banking on is that in case Magnus goes bishop b6, Then you go knight c5, taking advantage of the fact that this bishop is pinned again as the rook on a8 is hanging. There we go, knight c5, attacking the pawn on b7. So what does Magnus do here? You can go bishop c8 back, and I'm sure you're fine. But otherwise, I mean, rook b8 looks kind of passive. And actually, maybe you can take and go bishop b4.
I think Magnus missed knight c5, the way he slowed down, and look at his body language. He's missing ideas, and it's really irking him. But if you played bishop to c8, and it's kind of a recognition that something went wrong. Instead, he gives up the b7 pawn, because bishop c8, rook takes e2 check.
Right. So in case white takes, there's here, but there's a6 though. You can take an e2, king f1, but the a pawn could be scary. Also, there are moves like knight d8 hanging in the position.
Good point with the knight check. This is looking very tricky, and if Jan Nepomniachtchi wants to cut into this lead that Magnus Carlsen has, he has to play knight takes b7. He goes for it. I still think that black should be easily okay here, but rook takes e2.
Right. What Magnus? What Magnus can always do is perhaps trade at the right moment, go rook b8. Although if he does so right away, there might be bishop b4, and black all of a sudden is lost. But yeah, he should still be completely fine, but he has to be careful.
And he does go for the e-pawn, and he's thinking after king to f1, but what is wrong with rook a2? Knight d8 check, king e8, knight takes c6, barely.
g4 by Jan. I think he rushed there. c5, great move by Magnus. He wants to take on b7, followed by rook b8, and now there's no longer bishop to b4. Maybe Jan should have played like bishop a5 to set up knight d8, but I think now Magnus is doing great.
Yeah, because Magnus is just going to steal a pawn, and that rook on h8 is trapped. What do you do about that? Like, the rook is simply stuck in the corner.
I don't see a move. He sacks it on f8. What? And takes on c5, but Robert, this has to be lost. The a-pawn is going to disappear very soon, and you will be down a very clean exchange.
Well, maybe he gets bishop b6, 8. Oh, what a find from Magnus.
What a find. He's going to be up a clean exchange here, and this one is going to... I mean, this right now is just a matter of technique. I'm pretty sure this endgame has to be winning. He goes f5 to break up the pawns. It still requires some work, though, to actually win this game.
Yeah, perhaps there is a chance here for Jan. I mean, I was looking at the eval bar. Well, now it says losing. So before it wasn't all the way down there. But look at this. He's going to go cut this king off and then bring his own king in.
He goes g5. That gives him a weakness on the g5 square, though. But I assume that sooner or later, white is going to lose his pawn on f3.
I feel like Magnus just knows when positions are winning. He just protected his g-pawn, and he'll bring his king in, like right now. And then if the bishop somehow attacks the pawn again, he'll bring his rook back to d5, but that's not happening.
Exactly. Okay, so for the moment Jan is hanging on, you sit with the bishop here, but I assume that at some moment you're gonna end up in Zugzwang. Okay, so how do you... that's a nice move. If you take, then check and king e3.
That's sick. That's such a nasty way to win the game, which Magnus Carlsen does.